Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was recruited into the Suicide Squad as their key asset. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sky over Muzidafu was a brilliant, almost aggressive blue that morning, the kind of sky that promised picnics and laughter, a perfect canvas for the towering silver monoliths of the city's skyline. It was a beautiful day to watch the world end. For Izuku Midoriya, codenamed Deku, the day had started with the familiar thrum of One for All coursing through his veins like a second pulse. It was a symphony of green lightning and coiled power, a feeling he had come to associate with hope, with saving people, with being a hero. He was on patrol with a dozen other top-tier sidekicks and a handful of pro-heroes, a coordinated effort to sweep a recently revitalized criminal syndicate from the city's underbelly. The operation was going smoothly. Too smoothly. The first sign of trouble wasn't an explosion. It was silence. The city's vibrant hum, the distant traffic, the chatter over their comms, it all vanished, sucked into a vacuum of dreadful anticipation. Then the ground bucked like a living thing. From the heart of the commercial district, a wave of grotesque figures erupted from the earth. They weren't the common thugs they'd been briefed on. They were something new, something nightmarish. Neonoma, sleeker, faster, and horrifyingly intelligent. One had wings like a pterodactyl and skin like obsidian, another skittered on multiple limbs like a chrome-plated insect, its head swiveling with predatory focus. They moved with a chilling coordination, a hive mind bent on pure destruction. The pros engaged immediately. Endeavor's flames painted hellish murals across the sky. Hawks's feathers became a silver storm of razor-sharp projectiles. But there were too many. For every Neonomu incinerated or pinned, two more would burst from a subway entrance, or tear through the side of a building. Chaos was a tidal wave, and the heroes were drowning. Deku moved in a blur of green light, a comet of focused heroism. He used Black Whip to create a web, catching a bus full of screaming civilians as it was thrown by a hulking, four-armed beast. He used FA Gene to build kinetic energy, launching himself through the air to deliver a pinpoint St. Louis smash to the head of a shrieking, sonic-powered creature. He was saving people. It was what he did. It was who he was. But he could feel the battle turning. The Neonomu were hurting them, pushing the civilians into a concentrated kill box surrounded by the district's three tallest skyscrapers, the Trident Towers. They were architectural marvels, triumphs of modern engineering, and they were about to become tombstones for thousands. He saw the linchpin of their strategy then. A slender, almost unassuming Neonoma stood at the center of the plaza, its hands pressed against the pavement. It wasn't fighting, it was concentrating. The ground around it warped, and a low, resonant groan filled the air. A quirk that manipulated geological stress, or perhaps gravity on a macro scale. Cracks began to spiderweb up the foundations of the Trident Towers. They were being destabilized from their very roots. All heroes, converge on the central plaza! Endeavor's voice roared over the comms, strained and laced with fury. That thing is bringing the towers down! We have to, GGHH! The transmission cut out in a burst of static. Deku's eyes, wide and green, took in the tactical nightmare. The Gravity Noma was protected by a phalanx of the strongest beasts. Hundreds of civilians were trapped in the open plaza below, cowering behind overturned cars and shattered fountains. The towers were already groaning, shedding glass and concrete like tears. They had seconds, not minutes. Seconds. All Might's voice echoed in his memory. You have to make the hard choices, my boy. A hero's path is paved with them. The vestiges of One for All screamed in his soul, a chorus of power and desperation. He saw the faces in the crowd below, a mother shielding her child, an old man frozen in terror. A young couple holding hands as they stared up at their impending doom. He could reach the Gravity Noma. He knew he could. But a focused attack wouldn't be enough. He had to disrupt its influence on a massive scale, to create a shockwave so powerful it would shatter the creature's concentration and hopefully counteract the gravitational pull. It was a choice between two impossibilities. Let the towers fall on everyone, or unleash a power so great, so devastating, that it might save them but at an unknown cost. He saw no other way. I have to save them, he whispered, the words a prayer and a curse. He shot into the sky, a green star against the blue canvas. He coiled every ounce of one for all, drawing on the strength of the 8 souls within him until his body felt like it would tear itself apart. The green lightning was no longer a gentle aura. It was a raging storm, arcing and snapping with terrifying force. Delaware smash! 100%! He didn't aim at the Noma. He aimed at the air itself, a focal point directly above the plaza. He flicked his finger, and the world broke. The air pressure change was apocalyptic. A dome of pure force erupted from his fingertip, visible for a split second as a distortion in space. The sound that followed was not an explosion. It was the sound of the sky being ripped in two. The shockwaves slammed downwards. The gravity Noma was instantly atomized, its body disintegrating into dust before it could even register the attack. The other Neonoma in the vicinity were flayed, thrown like ragdolls into the distance. The civilians in the plaza were flattened against the ground, knocked unconscious by the pressure but miraculously shielded from the worst of it by the very crater the blast created. He had done it. He had saved them. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then came the groan. It was a deep, guttural sound of shearing metal and cracking stone. The shockwave that had saved the people had been the final straw for the already compromised structures. The Trident towers, their foundations fractured and now assaulted by an atmospheric cannon, began to fall. It wasn't a controlled demolition. It was a chaotic, horrifying collapse, the 3 towers leaning into each other, twisting and tearing themselves apart in a slow-motion cascade of steel and death. Deku could only watch, suspended in the air, his arm a shattered ruin of purple and black. The raw power of his quirk had saved the people from the immediate threat, only to deliver a more terrible one. He saw the buildings fall, saw the dust cloud rise like a hungry god to swallow the city block, and he knew, with a certainty that froze his soul, that not everyone had been in the plaza. There had been people in those towers. Offices, apartments, homes. The last thing he remembered before the darkness claimed him was the sound of screaming, a sound he knew would haunt him for the rest of his life. Izuku Midoriya woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the muted beeping of a heart monitor. He was in a private room, stark and white, at the HPSC Central Hospital. His arm was encased in a complex medical brace, but the physical pain was a distant echo compared to the roaring inferno of guilt in his mind. He remembered everything. The fall of the towers. The dust cloud. The screaming. A nurse entered, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "You're awake, Mr. Midoriya. The commission president will be here to speak with you shortly." He tried to ask about the casualties, about his friends, about the city, but his throat was sandpaper. The words wouldn't come out. The nurse simply adjusted his foredrip and left, the click of the closing door sounding like a jail cell shutting. He didn't have to wait long. The door opened again to admit a woman in a severe, dark gray suit. She was the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission, a figure he had only ever seen on television. Her face was stern, etched with lines of authority, and her eyes held no warmth. "Izuku Midoriya," she said, her voice as cold and sterile as the room. "Due to your actions during the Muzutafu incident, the provisional hero license granted to you by UA High School has been indefinitely suspended." The words hit him, but he was too numb to feel their full weight. "The preliminary casualty count from the Trident Tower's collapse stands at 172. She continued, her tone unchanging, as if she were reading a grocery list. 314 injured. The property damage is incalculable. While your actions did neutralize the primary threat and save the lives of the estimated 2,000 civilians in the plaza, the public perception is unfavorable." Public perception. The phrase made him want to vomit. 172 people were dead because of him. "The media is calling it the Deku catastrophe," she said, and for the first time, a flicker of something, disdain, perhaps, crossed her face. "They are asking questions. How could a student, a child, be allowed to wield such destructive power? Was UA negligent? Was the entire Heroes system reckless? Public faith is hemorrhaging. We must cauterize the wound." The door opened again. This time, it was All Might, in his skeletal form, and a grim-faced Shota Aizawa. "President." Aizawa's voice was a low growl. "This is unacceptable." He was following emergency combat protocols. He made a difficult choice in an impossible situation to prevent a greater loss of life, a choice that killed 172 people, Mr. Aizawa. The president countered coolly. The law is clear. Uncontrolled quirk usage resulting in civilian casualties is grounds for immediate license revocation and, in severe cases, criminal charges. This is not a criminal. All Might's voice, though lacking its signature boom, was filled with a desperate fire. This is a boy who has saved more people than most pro-heroes. He is a hero. He was a hero. The president corrected, her gaze locking onto Izuku. Now, he is a liability. A symbol of fear. The public needs someone to hold accountable. They need to believe the system works, that those who cause such destruction, hero or villain, will face consequences. Izuku finally found his voice, a raw, broken whisper. She's right. All Might and Aizawa turned to him, their faces a mixture of shock and pain. I killed them. Izuku choked out, tears finally breaking free and tracing hot paths down his cheeks. He could see their faces in his mind, the ghosts of the 172 people he had never met but had sentenced to death. I thought I was saving everyone, but I destroyed everything. I'm a monster. His confession hung in the air, a gift to the HPSC president. Her expression softened, but it was a calculated, predatory softening. She had her scapegoat. We are not pressing criminal charges, Midoriya, she said, the magnanimous tone of her voice making his skin crawl. That would lead to a public trial, and more questions we would rather not answer. Instead, for your own protection and for the stability of society, you will be placed in protective custody at a secure, undisclosed location. Aizawa took a step forward. What location? He's my student. I have a right to know. The president's eyes were like chips of ice. No, Mr. Aizawa. You don't. As of this moment, Izuku Midoriya is the property and responsibility of the HPSC. This conversation is over. She turned and left. Aizawa looked like he was about to tear the room apart. All Might simply deflated, the last of his fight draining away, replaced by an ocean of sorrow. He looked at Izuku, his successor, his boy, and saw a broken child drowning in a guilt he had helped to foster. I'm sorry, young Midoriya. All Might whispered, tears welling in his own sunken eyes. I am so sorry. The transfer happened at night, away from prying eyes. They didn't take him to a regular prison. They took him to the last place he ever thought he'd see from the inside. They took him to Tartarus. The cell was a perfect cube of white. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all of it was a seamless, sterile white that seemed to absorb all sound. There was no bed, only a retractable slab that emerged from the wall. There was no window, no toilet, only a small, hidden panel for food delivery. It was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to break the minds of the world's most dangerous villains. For Izuku, it was a tomb. He lost track of time. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of white light and dim light. He didn't eat much. The food, a tasteless nutrient paste, would often sit untouched. He spent his time sitting on the floor, staring at the white walls, replaying the incident. He saw the towers fall 1,000 times, 1,000,000. Each time, he heard the screams. He tried to summon the vestiges of One for All, to speak with Nana Shimura or the first user, but they were silent. His own guilt and despair had created a wall between them, and he was utterly, completely alone with his failure. The hero named Deku died in that white room. The boy who dreamed, the boy who scribbled in notebooks, the boy who smiled to reassure others, he was gone. All that was left was Izuku Midoriya, the killer, the catastrophe, the monster. He accepted it. It was his penance. He didn't know how long he had been there, weeks, maybe months, when the routine was finally broken. There was no warning. The door to his cell, a door he hadn't even realized was there, hissed open with a pneumatic sigh. The sound was so alien, so loud in the crushing silence, that he flinched. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. It was a woman, her form sharp and defined in a perfectly tailored business suit. She walked into the cell, her high heels clicking with an unnerving confidence on the sterile floor. He looked up, his eyes dull and unfocused, and saw a face that was all sharp angles and sharper intelligence. Her dark eyes scanned him from head to toe, not with pity or contempt, but with the dispassionate air of a butcher assessing a cut of meat. "Izuku Midoriya," she said. Her voice was deep, laced with gravel and an authority that dwarfed the HPSC president's. "My name is Amanda Waller. I'm here to offer you a second chance." Izuku didn't respond. He just stared. What was one more ghost in his tomb? Waller took his silence as an invitation to continue. She produced a tablet from an inside pocket of her jacket and tapped the screen. It lit up, and she turned it to face him. The image was a news report. Ochako Uraraka and Tenya Ida were being swarmed by a pack of reporters outside the gates of UE. Microphones were shoved in their faces. "Is it true Midoriya acted alone? Were you aware of his mental instability? UE is hiding a monster, aren't they?" Their faces were pale, their eyes filled with a desperate, confused pain as they tried to push through the crowd. They were suffering because of him. Waller swiped the screen. The next image was a grainy security video. It was his mother's apartment building. Someone in a hoodie ran up, hurled a brick through her front window, and sprinted away. The camera zoomed in on the brick. The word "monster" was scrawled on it in angry red paint. A sound escaped Izuku's throat, a raw, wounded noise. His mother. They were hurting his mother. "A terrible tragedy," Waller said, her voice devoid of any real sympathy. "The HPSC has done what it can to protect her, but public sentiment is a powerful, ugly thing. They need someone to hate. Right now, that's you. And that hatred is splashing onto everyone you ever cared about." She switched off the tablet and knelt, bringing herself to his eye level. He could smell her perfume, a faint, expensive scent that felt obscene in the sterile environment of his cell. "I am the director of a special division within the HPSC," she explained. "A clandestine unit tasked with handling threats that official heroes can't, or won't. We are a team of disposable assets. Criminals, villains. People the world has already forgotten, sent on missions with a near-zero chance of survival." She paused, letting the word sink in. "I call it Task Force X. The world at large knows it by another name, the Suicide Squad." Izuku's mind, sluggish from weeks of isolation, slowly began to process her words. A team of villains. A Suicide Squad. What did that have to do with him? "I'm not a villain," he rasped, his voice raw from disuse. "Aren't you?" Waller's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. 172 dead would argue otherwise. "The public thinks you are. The Commission has branded you as one. In the eyes of the world, Izuku Midoriya, you are one of the most effective mass murderers in modern Japanese history. The only difference between you and Tamura Shigaraki is your motive." The words were like daggers, and they found their mark. "But I don't care about your motives," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I care about your power. I have a use for a weapon of mass destruction that can be aimed. I have a use for you." She stood up, towering over him. "Here's my offer. You come work for me. You join my squad. You point that world-breaking power wherever I tell you to. In exchange, I make all of this go away." She gestured at the white walls, at the footage on the tablet, at the whole miserable situation. "I have the authority to bury this. I can move your mother to a secure, private location where no one will ever find her. I can plant stories in the press that exonerate your friends and you, shift the blame to a new, fictional villain. I can give them their lives back. I can give you a purpose again. Not as a hero, but as a tool. A necessary evil that saves the world from the shadows." It was a devil's bargain, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, woven from poison and lies. He knew it. He knew she was a monster of a different sort, but the image of the brick crashing through his mother's window was burned into his mind. The haunted faces of Ochako and Ida. "What's the catch?" he managed to ask. Waller smiled, a genuine, cold smile this time. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. "The catch is that you belong to me. Your life is forfeit. You will follow every order without question, without hesitation. And to ensure your compliance," she produced a small, pistol-like device from her jacket. It had a wicked-looking needle at its tip. This will inject a remote detonated nanite explosive into the base of your skull. It's about the size of a grain of rice. Try to run, disobey a direct order, or so much as look at me the wrong way, and I will detonate it, and your head will pop like a ripe melon. Do you understand? He understood perfectly. He would be trading one prison for another. A sterile white box for a gilded cage with a leash made of explosives. But in this new prison, his mother would be safe. His friends would be free. It wasn't a choice. It had never been a choice. It was just the next hard decision on a path paved with them. He looked up at Amanda Waller, the woman offering him damnation as if it were salvation, and saw the reflection of his own monstrous failure in her cold, dark eyes. The hero was dead. The symbol was broken. All that was left was the power. And she was the only one offering to use it. With a shuddering breath that felt like his last, Izuku Midoriya nodded. Yes, he whispered. The smile on Waller's face widened. Excellent. Welcome to the Suicide Squad, Asset Alpha. She pressed the injector against his neck. The sharp, cold sting was the last thing he felt as a free man. The transfer from Tartarus was a study in efficient brutality. There was no paperwork, no formal discharge. Only the hiss of his cell door and the presence of two towering guards clad in matte black tactical gear, their faces obscured by polarized visors. They didn't speak to him. They flanked him, their movements sharp and economical, and guided him through corridors he had never seen, a labyrinthine path deeper into the prison's guts. Izuku walked in a daze, his limbs heavy, his mind a foggy landscape of guilt and resignation. The white walls of his solitary confinement gave way to gunmetal gray, scarred with age and abuse. The sterile silence was replaced by a low, industrial hum, punctuated by the distant, echoing clang of a steel door or a faint, desperate shout that was quickly muffled. He was a ghost being led through purgatory. They reached a subterranean docking bay, where a windowless, armored transport vehicle waited, its engine rumbling like a caged beast. Amanda Waller stood beside it, tablet in hand, her posture radiating an impatient, absolute authority. She didn't acknowledge him as a person, only as cargo to be loaded. Get him in! She ordered the guards, her eyes never leaving her screen. The journey was short and disorienting. There were no windows, only the oppressive darkness and the lurching motion of the vehicle. He felt it descend, a long, continuous drop that made his ears pop. They were going deep. Deeper than Tartarus. Deeper than any place he imagined could exist beneath a bustling nation. When the vehicle finally shuddered to a halt, and the rear doors ground open, the air that hit him was different. It was cold, damp, and heavy with the smell of stale recycled oxygen, ozone, and something metallic and unpleasant, like old blood. He was in a massive cavern, crudely carved from the bedrock. The ceiling was a network of thick conduits and support beams, lost in the shadows far above. The only light came from harsh, buzzing fluorescent strips that cast everything in a sickly greenish-white pallor. This wasn't a prison. It was a tomb for the living. A sign, crudely stenciled in English and Japanese on the rock wall, confirmed his dread. Belle Reve Facility, Japan Branch, HPSC Task Force X Division. Hai no Adaranai Basho. The place the sun doesn't touch. The two guards hauled him out and marched him toward a processing center, a blocky concrete structure built into the cavern wall. The process was swift and dehumanizing. He was ordered to strip. His tattered prisoner jumpsuit was incinerated. He was shoved under a nozzle that blasted him with a high-pressure spray of ice-cold, foul-smelling disinfectant that stung his skin. After he was hosed down, he was given his new uniform. It wasn't a hero costume or a prisoner's jumpsuit. It was a set of simple, functional black fatigues, a drab, anonymous skin for a drab, anonymous tool. As he pulled on the shirt, he noticed the designation stenciled in white over the breast pocket, Asset Alpha. Not a name, not a number. A classification. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was a thing. A new guard, this one with a scarred face and a dead-eyed stare, led him from processing. Waller wants the new meat in the common room. Let's go, Alpha. The term sent a fresh wave of nausea through him. He followed numbly down a long corridor, the guard's boots echoing alongside the shuffling sound of his own. The guard stopped before a heavy, reinforced steel door with a small, barred window. Through it, Izuku could see a large, circular room, and he could hear voices, a low, menacing laugh, a cheerful, sing-song hum, and the rhythmic, heavy thud of something hitting a punching bag. General population, the guard grunted. Try not to get eaten on your first day. With a screech of protesting metal, the doors slid open, and a firm shove from the guard sent him stumbling inside. The door slammed shut behind him with the finality of a coffin lid being sealed. The common room was a pit. The floor was worn concrete, the walls lined with benches and scuffed weightlifting equipment. In the center of the room was a simple table and chairs, bolted to the floor. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and simmering animosity. And sitting at that table, or moving through the space, were the nightmares he used to fight. The first to notice him was the one making the rhythmic thudding sound. A mountain of a man, his body a grotesque tapestry of exposed, writhing muscle fibers, was pummeling a heavy bag that looked ready to burst. The bag swung back, and for a moment, the man's face was visible. A cruel grin, a wild shock of spiky blonde hair, and a prosthetic eye that whirred as it focused on him. It was Muscular. The man who had tried to murder a child. The man whose arm Izuku had shattered. The punching stopped. The room, which had been filled with a low murmur of activity, fell silent. Muscular turned, his one good eye widening in disbelief, followed by a surge of pure, murderous rage. No fucking way, he growled, his voice a low rumble like grinding stone. He cracked his knuckles, the sound like gunshots in the sudden quiet. You! I'd know that pathetic, freckled face anywhere. The little Yui brat who broke my arm. Izuku's body tensed on pure instinct, his feet shifting into a familiar fighting stance before his conscious mind could even react. One for all, a phantom limb he could no longer truly wield, tingled faintly beneath his skin. He was a weapon without a trigger, a hero without a cause, but the instincts remained. Muscular laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Look at that! Still thinks he's a hero. You're in Belle Reve, kid. There are no heroes here. He took a step forward, muscle fibers coiling and uncoiling over his arms like a nest of snakes. I'm going to enjoy tearing you apart, piece by piece, and this time, there's no one here to stop me. Before he could take another step, a cheerful, almost musical voice cut through the tension. Oh, let him be, Kuda Crusher. Don't break the new toy so soon. I want to play with him. From the shadows of a corner, a girl skipped into the light. She wore the same black fatigues, but they seemed ill-fitting on her small frame, and she moved with a dancer's grace that was entirely at odds with the oppressive environment. It was Himiko Toga. Her blonde hair was in its usual messy buns, and her golden, cat-like eyes were fixed on Izuku with an expression of absolute, manic delight. She zipped across the room and stopped inches from him, tilting her head as she examined him. She smelled faintly of antiseptic and something sweet, like iron and sugar. Izuku Midoriya, she breathed, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. I saw it all on the news. The big boom, the falling buildings, it was so beautiful. All that blood and dust. You looked so sad and handsome when they carried you away. So broken. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, her eyes sparkling. I love you most when you're like this. You're finally seeing things my way, aren't you? To get what you love, sometimes you have to break things. It's the ultimate expression of love. Her proximity was unnerving. Her logic was terrifying. He felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck. This was a girl who had tried to drain his blood, who saw carnage as a form of affection. Muscular scoffed. Get away from him, you crazy bitch. He's mine. Oh, don't be selfish. Toga pouted, not taking her eyes off Izuku. There's enough of him to go around. I just want a little taste. To see what a fallen hero's blood is like. Does it taste like regret? Or freedom? Izuku took an involuntary step back, bumping into the cold steel of the door. He was trapped between a brute who wanted to kill him and a predator who wanted to consume him. This was hell. This was his new home. Enough. The voice was quiet, bored, and laced with pure venom. It came from a figure leaning against the far wall, almost blending into the shadows. He was tall and slender, his body a patchwork of scarred, purplish skin held together by surgical staples. Patches of stark white hair contrasted with the few remaining tufts of black. His turquoise eyes, burning with a cold, intelligent fire, were fixed on Izuku. It was Dabi. A member of the League of Villains Vanguard, a man who burned his enemies to ash with an almost casual indifference. He pushed himself off the wall and sauntered forward, his movements lazy, almost feline. He circled Izuku like a shark, his gaze analytical and filled with a profound, weary contempt. "Leave him be," Dabi said, his voice a low drawl that was somehow more menacing than Muscular's roar. "Waller wouldn't throw a Yui golden boy in here just for sport. He's one of us now." He stopped in front of Izuku, a smirk playing on his stapled lips. "Isn't that right, Izuku Midoriya? The next symbol of peace? Tell me, how does it feel to have all that power, all that hope, and end up in the same trash heap as the rest of us?" The words were precise, each one a scalpel designed to gut him from the inside out. Dabi wasn't interested in his body. He was targeting his soul. "You spent your whole life trying to be All Might," Dabi continued, his voice dropping lower. "You preached about saving everyone, about smiling through the pain, but one bad day, one little mistake, and the same society you swore to protect threw you away like garbage. They called you a monster and locked you in a cage with the real monsters." It's almost poetic. He let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. "Welcome to the other side, hero. It's not so different, is it? We just don't bother lying to ourselves about what we are." Izuku couldn't answer. Dabi's words echoed the darkest thoughts that had festered in his mind in the white cell. He had failed. He had been discarded. And now he was here, with them. Maybe Dabi was right. His analytical mind, a part of him he couldn't switch off, was still working, cataloging the threats. Muscular, overwhelming physical power, predictable, driven by rage. Toga, unpredictable, agile, high threat in close quarters, psychologically disorienting. Dabi, ranged combatant, high destructive power, intelligent, a psychological manipulator. They were a dysfunctional, lethal cocktail of chaos. And there was one more. On a raised platform in the corner of the room, a woman was meticulously cleaning a complex, biomechanical rifle. She hadn't moved or spoken since he'd entered. Her long, dark blue hair was tied back, and she wore the same black fatigues, but with a sense of military precision the others lacked. Her movements were fluid and economical as she disassembled and reassembled the weapons chamber. She looked up, and her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. He recognized her instantly. Lady Nagant. One of the HPSC's top pro heroes, a legendary sniper, years before his time. She had been arrested for killing a fellow hero, a scandal that had been swiftly buried. She was a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of hero schools, a symbol of how even the best could fall. Her gaze held no malice, no curiosity, only a deep, bottomless cynicism, the look of someone who had seen the ugly truth behind the curtain and could no longer pretend it wasn't there. She was a dark mirror, showing him a potential future he now felt hurtling toward him. She looked away, dismissing him as unimportant, and returned to her rifle. Muscular had had enough of the talking. "I'm done waiting," he charged, a 200-kilogram missile of pure muscle. Izuku braced himself, the world slowing down as his training kicked in. He couldn't use one for all, not really, but he could still move, he could still fight. He prepared to dodge, to redirect the momentum, to do something. Bzzzzzzzt. A sickening, high-pitched electrical sound filled the room. Every villain present, from the charging Muscular to the aloof Dabi, flinched and grabbed at their necks, crying out in pain. Muscular collapsed to his knees, his muscles spasming, his face contorted in agony. Toga whimpered, curling into a ball. Dabi gritted his teeth, a low curse hissing through them. Lady Nagant merely closed her eye, her hand tightening on her rifle, her jaw set. The massive steel door hissed open again. Amanda Waller stood there, a small remote in her hand. Beside her was a man Izuku didn't recognize. He was tall, with a stern, military bearing, dressed in tactical gear that was cleaner and more official-looking than the villain's fatigues. He held a high-tech assault rifle with the casual familiarity of a career soldier. "That was a warning," Waller said, her voice cutting through the groans of pain. The buzzing stopped. "The next time any of you act out of line, I won't give you a love tap. I will turn the voltage up until your brains boil inside your skulls." Am I understood? A series of sullen, resentful murmurs answered her. Muscular staggered to his feet, glaring at her with pure hatred, but he didn't dare take another step toward Izuku. Waller had established her dominance in less than 5 seconds. Good, she said, stepping into the room. The man followed, his eyes sweeping over the assembled villains, his expression one of professional disgust. He lingered on Izuku for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable, pity? Contempt, in his gaze before it hardened back into a soldier's mask. This is Colonel Rick Flag, Waller announced. He is your field commander. His orders are my orders. You will give him the same respect and immediate obedience you give me, unless you wish to test the effective blast radius of a nanite charge. She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Then her cold eyes settled on Izuku. And this, she said to the room, is our newest asset. You will not touch him. You will not harm him. You will not speak to him unless it is mission-related. Dalby let out a cynical scoff. Why the special treatment for the fallen angel? Is he your new pet project? Waller's gaze was sharp enough to cut steel. He is not your teammate. He is not your friend. He is a strategically vital weapon. I am pointing him, and you, at the enemies of this nation. You are all tools in my box. He just happens to be the hammer. You are the scalpels, the wrenches, the disposable screwdrivers. Do you understand the difference? She walked toward the center of the room, her presence sucking all the air out. Most of you know the drill, but for the benefit of our new acquisition, let's review the rules. You exist for one purpose: to serve the interests of the Japanese government on missions deemed too dangerous or too politically sensitive for our public-facing heroes. These are black operations. You do not officially exist. If you are captured or killed, we will deny any knowledge of you. She began to pace slowly. Upon successful completion of a mission, you will have time commuted from your sentences. 10 years for a standard op, 20 for a high-risk one. Impress me enough, and you might even see the sun again one day. Though I wouldn't count on it. Her eyes scanned each of them. But if you disobey an order, if you attempt to escape, if you endanger the mission or attack a member of command staff. Her thumb hovered over a large red button on her remote. I will detonate the explosive I've so graciously placed in your necks. It is a clean, efficient process. Your head will be gone before your body hits the floor. Izuku's hand instinctively went to the back of his neck. He could feel nothing, but he knew it was there. A tiny bomb, a leash, a period at the end of his life sentence. To prove her point, Waller's gaze fell upon a lanky, greasy-haired villain Izuku hadn't noticed before, a low-level thug who had been trying to make himself invisible in the corner. For example, Slipknot here was apprehended trying to sell HPSC secrets on the dark web. He seems to think that because he is clever with ropes, he is clever enough to outsmart me. The man named Slipknot began to sweat, his eyes wide with terror. And no, ma'am, I wouldn't, I swear. You are a loose end, Waller stated, her voice utterly devoid of emotion. She pressed the red button. There was no loud explosion. There was only a sickeningly wet pop, like a champagne cork being pulled from a bottle of gore. Slipknot's head simply vanished in a fine red mist. His body stood erect for a full second, a geyser of blood erupting from his neck, before it crumpled to the floor in a heap. Toga giggled, a high, delighted sound that made Izuku's blood run cold. Muscular looked impressed. Dalby looked bored. Lady Nagant didn't even flinch. Colonel Flagg's jaw was tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek, but he said nothing. This was his normal. Izuku stared at the headless corpse, the coppery smell of blood filling his nostrils, and he felt the last vestiges of the hero he had been shrivel up and die. This was the world he now inhabited, a world of casual executions, where life was a privilege granted and revoked by the woman in the business suit. Waller turned away from the body as if it were a piece of litter. The janitors will get that. Now, back to our newest asset. Her gaze locked onto Izuku again, and it was here, in front of the killers and monsters, that she delivered the final, killing blow to his identity. You are here because of your quirk, she said, her voice clear and carrying through the room. One for All is a power capable of leveling a city. An extinction-level event in the hands of a child. The HPSC saw a liability. I see an opportunity. You are my nuclear option. My deterrent. When a situation is so utterly hopeless that I need to throw a miracle at it, I will throw you. You are not here to save people, Midoriya. You are here to eliminate problems. You are a weapon, and nothing more. Your designation is Asset Alpha. We will call you Deku in the field, as a reminder of how useless you were before you embraced your power's destructive potential. Each word was a nail in his coffin. She had taken his name, the name that Ochako had turned from an insult into a source of pride, and twisted it back into a mark of failure. You will all be quartered here, Waller concluded, gesturing to the Spartan room. There are sleeping cells off the main hall. You will train together. You will eat together. You will learn to function as a unit, or you will die. Your first briefing is at 0600 tomorrow. Do not be late. With that, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the concrete. Colonel Flagg gave them all one last hard look before following her, the heavy door slamming shut and locking with a definitive thud. The common room was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint dripping from Slipknot's corpse. The brutal demonstration had worked. The simmering aggression was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful obedience. Muscular shot Izuku a look that promised a world of pain the moment Waller's leash was off, but he retreated to his punching bag. Toga sighed dramatically, disappointed that her new toy was off limits, and went to practice throwing knives at a target on the wall. Dabi simply returned to his corner, melting back into the shadows, his turquoise eyes still glowing with cold amusement. Lady Nagant continued to clean her rifle as if nothing had happened. Izuku was left standing in the middle of the room, alone. He looked from the bloodstain on the floor to the faces of the villains who were now his squad mates. These were not misunderstood souls or victims of circumstance. They were killers, psychopaths, and terrorists. They were the embodiment of everything he had fought against. And Amanda Waller had just looked at him, at all of them, and declared that he was the Hammer. He was the biggest monster in a room full of them. He slowly walked to an empty bench and sat down, his body feeling like it was made of lead. He put his head in his hands, the rough material of his new uniform scratching against his skin. The sterile white walls of Tartarus had been a tomb for his spirit. This place, this cold, dark, bloody pit, was something worse. It was a crucible designed to burn away the last of his humanity and forge him into the weapon Waller wanted. He was Asset Alpha. He was the nuke. He was a member of the Suicide Squad. He thought of All Might's smiling face, of his mother's worried tears, of his friends at UA. They felt like memories from another person's life. A life that had ended the day the Trident Towers fell. He didn't know if he could survive this place. More than that, as he listened to the rhythmic thud of Muscular's fists and the quiet, happy humming of Himiko Toga, he wasn't sure if the person who walked out, if anyone ever did, would be someone worth saving. The briefing room was a sterile, refrigerated box of steel and glass. It was the polar opposite of UA's bright, hopeful classrooms. Here, the only light came from the cold, blue-white glow of a massive holographic display that dominated one wall. At precisely 0600, the door hissed open and Amanda Waller strode in, flanked by a stone-faced Colonel Flagg. She carried no notes, no tablet. The entire operation was etched into her mind. The squad was already assembled around the large, black table. They looked less like a team and more like a police lineup of society's worst impulses. Muscular was cracking his thick knuckles, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Toga was humming a cheerful, discordant tune while idly tracing patterns on the table with a finger. Lady Nagant sat perfectly still, her posture ramrod straight, her focus on the display with a professional, detached air. Dabi was slouched in his chair, the picture of bored apathy, though his turquoise eyes missed nothing. Izuku sat apart from them, at the very end of the table. He was rigid, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, trying to treat this like a mission briefing from Aizawa-sensei. But the weight of the company he kept was a physical pressure, a constant reminder of the abyss he had fallen into. "All right, you reprobates, listen up," Waller began, her voice cutting through the room like a shard of glass. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the portrait of a man with thinning hair, nervous eyes, and a weak chin. "This is Dr. Eris Thorne, a disgraced geneticist, formerly of the HPSC's own Quirk Research Division. More importantly, he was a junior associate of Dr. Kyudai Garaki at Jaku General Hospital. A flicker of recognition crossed Izuku's face. Garaki. The mad scientist behind the Nomu, all for one's personal physician. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few more degrees. Thorn believes he has perfected Garaki's work on quark amplification. Waller continued, as schematics of complex molecular structures filled the display. He calls his formula catalyst. It's a hyperadrenalizing agent that temporarily pushes a quirk far beyond its natural limits. Our intelligence suggests it can grant a low-level pyrokinetic enough power to incinerate a city block, or turn a simple speedster into a supersonic blur. Muscular grunted, a flicker of interest in his eye. Toga leaned forward, her smile widening. The promise of more power, more chaos, was a language they all understood. There's a catch, of course, Waller said with a dry smirk. The cellular degradation is catastrophic. The user burns bright and then they burn out. The lifespan of a subject post-injection is estimated at less than an hour before total systemic collapse. Thorn has stolen the stable prototype and all of his research data. He's planning to sell it tonight. The display shifted to an image of a heavily armed group of men and women, their faces marked with a stylized symbol of a broken chain. The buyers are a Quark supremacist splinter cell known as the Purity Vanguard. They believe that only those with powerful quirks are fit to rule, and they see Catalyst as the key to enforcing their new world order. They are meeting Thorn in 2 hours at a decommissioned subway station beneath the old Kanto industrial sector. The display zoomed in on a detailed schematic of the station. Thorn has turned the place into a fortified laboratory, defended by a contingent of well-armed mercenaries. Your objective is threefold. Waller's voice became sharp, each word a distinct command. 1. Infiltrate the facility. 2. Secure all of Thorn's research and the catalyst prototype. 3. Her cold eyes swept across the room, lingering on Izuku for a moment. Eliminate Dr. Thorn. He knows too much about HPSC research protocols to be left alive. The Purity Vanguard and their mercenaries are expendable. Leave no witnesses. Izuku's blood ran cold. Eliminate. The word was so clean, so clinical, a sterile euphemism for murder. This wasn't a rescue mission. It wasn't about stopping a villain. It was a state-sanctioned assassination. He felt a wave of nausea and gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Flag will be your field command, Waller concluded. You will follow his every order as if it came from me. The transport leaves in 10 minutes. Gear up. She turned and strode out of the room without another word, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Flag stepped forward, his expression grim. You heard her. Grab your mission kits. He looked at Izuku. Alpha, your kit is designated. It's been modified for your specific talents. The gear was laid out in a sterile armory. The others grabbed familiar weapons and equipment. Toga checked a bandolier of gleaming knives and a new, high-tech blood-draining apparatus, muscular strapped on reinforced bracers. Dobby simply stretched his fingers, a wisp of blue flame dancing on their tips. Lady Nagant broke down and reassembled her rifle with blinding speed, slotting a magazine of what looked like armor-piercing rounds into it. Izuku's kit contained a darker, more tactical version of his hero costume. The familiar green was now a deep, muted forest green, almost black in the dim light. The white accents were gone, replaced with matte gray. The iconic mask was the same, but it felt like a mockery now, the smile a grim joke. The most significant addition was a set of custom-made vambraces, heavy and metallic. They're power regulators, Flag explained, noticing his stare. Waller wants your output controlled. Those will monitor the energy levels of One for All. If you go above a pre-approved percentage, 30% for this op, they'll deliver a debilitating electrical shock. We can't have you bringing another building down by accident, a leash on his power. A bomb in his neck. Izuku felt the walls of his cage growing smaller and tighter. He pulled on the costume, the familiar fabric feeling alien against his skin. He was dressing up as a hero to go play the part of a killer. The ride on the VTOL jet was tense and silent. They flew under a moonless, starless sky, a black void that matched Izuku's mood. He sat strapped into his seat, watching the city lights blur beneath them, a world he was no longer a part of. He was a phantom, a ghost sent to do the dirty work so that the people in those brightly lit homes could sleep soundly, ignorant of the monsters fighting on their behalf. They landed silently on the roof of a derelict warehouse a block from the target location. The air was cold and smelled of rust and urban decay. "Nagant, you have overwatch," Flag commanded, his voice a low, professional murmur over their comms. "Find a perch. Be our eyes. No loud shots unless absolutely necessary. We're going in quiet." Lady Nagant gave a curt nod, her rifle already materializing on her arm. She effortlessly scaled a nearby water tower, her movements a blur of practiced grace, and vanished into the shadows. "Toga, you're on point for infiltration. Dabi Muscular, you're the breach team. Alpha." Flag's gaze fell on Izuku, hard and unyielding. "You're with me. You are the failsafe. You do not engage unless I give the order. Stick to non-lethal takedowns. We need stealth until we reach the main lab. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir," Izuku mumbled, the words feeling foreign and bitter in his mouth. They descended into the darkness of the subway entrance, the stench of mildew and stagnant water replacing the crisp night air. Toga moved ahead, a Cheshire cat grin on her face as she danced through the shadows, her movements preternaturally silent. She held up a hand, pointing to a pair of mercenaries guarding a service tunnel entrance. They were armed with assault rifles, their body armor marking them as professional soldiers, not common thugs. Before Flag could issue an order, Toga was a blur. She dropped from a rusted pipe above, landing silently behind one guard. A flash of a knife, a choked gurgle, and he crumpled to the ground. The other guard turned, his eyes widening in shock, but it was too late. Toga was on him, her movements a dizzying whirlwind of violence. Izuku watched, frozen in horror. It was so fast, so efficient, so cheerful. She finished her work and turned back to them, her face splattered with blood, and gave them a disturbingly gleeful thumbs up. "Two down," she chirped into her comm. "Area is clear," Flag sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "So much for stealth." He pushed forward. "Move." They proceeded deeper, the concrete tunnels lit by emergency lighting that cast long, distorted shadows. They rounded a corner and came upon another patrol, this one with 4 mercenaries. They were more alert now, having likely missed the last check-in. One of them spotted their movement. "Intruders!" "Oh!" His warning was cut short by a jet of brilliant blue flame that erupted from the darkness. It wasn't a large, uncontrolled blast like Izuku had seen Dabi use before. It was a precise, concentrated lance of fire that struck the mercenary in the chest, incinerating him instantly, his armor melting like wax. His comrades stared in horror for a split second, which was all the opening Muscular needed. With a roar of pure joy he charged. It wasn't a fight, it was a demolition. He slammed into the remaining 3 men like a freight train, the sickening crunch of bone and metal echoing down the tunnel. He grabbed one by the head and simply squeezed, his muscle fibers coiling with terrifying power. Izuku felt bile rise in his throat. He had to look away. This wasn't a mission. It was a massacre. He was an accomplice. "Dabi! Muscular! I said controlled takedowns." Flag's voice was a furious hiss over the comms. "They're taken down," Dabi's bored drawl replied. "And I controlled the flame just fine." "Relax, Colonel. This is pest control." Suddenly, an alarm blared to life, a deafening klaxon that reverberated off the tunnel walls. Red lights began to flash, painting everything in a hellish crimson glow. So much for the quiet approach. Nagant's voice cut in, calm and steady. "I'm seeing heavy movement on the main platform. They're locking down the lab." "We're out of time," Flag growled. He looked at Izuku. "Alpha, path of least resistance. Now! Get us to that lab." The command snapped Izuku out of his horrified stupor. This, at least, was something he understood. Analyze, plan, execute. He closed his eyes for a second, accessing the station schematics Waller had shown them. The main route was a death trap. But there was a network of ventilation shafts running parallel to the main tunnel. "This way!" he shouted, pointing to a large vent cover on the wall. It's a straight shot to the lab's exterior wall. Muscular just laughed and punched the vent cover, ripping it from its moorings. Dalby followed with an air of profound boredom, while Toga skipped ahead into the darkness. Izuku and Flag scrambled in after them. The shaft was cramped and dark. Izuku took the lead, one for all humming at a low 5% in his legs, allowing him to move with an eerie speed and silence. He was a hero, he told himself. He was on a mission to stop dangerous technology from falling into the wrong hands. He just had to ignore the methods. He had to ignore the company. They reached another grate. Through it, Izuku could see the main laboratory. It was a large, open space carved out of the old station platform, filled with humming machinery, glass beakers bubbling with strange liquids, and computer terminals displaying complex data. In the center of it all was Dr. Thorne, frantically trying to pack a reinforced briefcase while a dozen mercenaries formed a defensive perimeter, their rifles aimed at the lab's main entrance. Nagant status? Flag whispered into his calm. The Purity Vanguard just arrived topside. They're fighting their way down. You've got maybe 5 minutes before this whole place becomes a three-way war zone. Copy that. Flag turned to Izuku. Alpha, on my mark, you breach that wall. Non-lethal force only. Your job is to create chaos, draw their fire. The rest of us will handle the hostiles and secure the objective. Izuku nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. Create a distraction. He could do that. He wouldn't have to kill anyone. He just had to be a hero for a few seconds. He crouched, channeling one for all into his legs and right arm. The green lightning, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a curse. The vambraces on his arm glowed faintly, the indicator light a steady green. He was well within the 30% limit. Mark! Flag commanded. Izuku kicked. Manchester smash! He didn't aim to destroy, he aimed to displace. A controlled 20% axe kick slammed into the wall next to the grate. The reinforced concrete buckled and shattered, exploding inward in a shower of dust and debris. He followed the breach through, landing in a crouch in the center of the lab. For a moment, there was stunned silence. The mercenaries stared at the boy in the dark green costume who had just appeared out of a solid wall. Then their training kicked in. Fire! A dozen assault rifles opened up. The air filled with the roar of gunfire. But Izuku was already moving. He was a blur of green, weaving between the hail of bullets. He wasn't the target they were used to. He was too fast, too agile. He lashed out with Black Whip, the dark tendrils erupting from his arms. They weren't the thick, powerful whips he used to stop villains. These were thin and precise, wrapping around rifle barrels, yanking them off target, entangling legs, and pulling mercenaries off their feet. In seconds, he had disarmed and incapacitated half of the guards without throwing a single punch. The rest of the squad burst through the hole he made. Dalby's blue flames washed over a group of mercenaries, who screamed as they were turned into human torches. Muscular charged another group, his laughter echoing over their panicked shouts. Toga danced through the chaos, her knives flashing, a deadly pixie in a storm of violence. It was over in 30 seconds. The lab was filled with the smell of burnt flesh, the groans of the wounded, and the sight of broken bodies. Izuku stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving, Black Whip retracting into his arms. He hadn't killed anyone. But he had created the opening for his monstrous teammates to do their work. The distinction felt razor-thin, a meaningless justification. Dr. Thorne was cowering behind a large server rack, holding the briefcase to his chest like a shield. His face was ashen, his body trembling uncontrollably. Please! He whimpered as Flag and the squad approached. Please don't kill me. I have a family. They made me do this. The HPSC, they buried my research, they threatened me. Flag's face was an unreadable mask. He raised his rifle. Waller's orders are clear, Doctor. Loose ends. No! The word burst from Izuku's lips before he could stop it. He moved, placing himself between Flag's rifle and the terrified scientist. The entire squad stopped, turning to look at him. Step aside, Alpha. Flag's voice was dangerously low. I won't let you kill him, Izuku said, his voice shaking but firm. He's unarmed. He's surrendered. We can take him into custody. Muscular let out a booming laugh. Custody? Kid, you still don't get it. There is no custody. There's just a mission. Now get out of the way before I move you myself. Still playing the hero? Dabi drawled, a cruel smirk on his face. Look around you, Izuku Midoriya. You're standing in a room full of corpses you helped create. You think drawing the line now makes you clean? You're not a hero. You're just a hypocrite in a cage, and Waller holds the key. He's so passionate. Toga chirped, her eyes wide with fascination. This is the best part. When he gets all fiery and righteous. It makes my heart go thump thump. Izuku ignored them, his eyes locked on Flag. Heroes don't kill, he said, the words feeling like a desperate prayer from a long-dead faith. It's the one line we don't cross. You are not a hero anymore, Flag stated, his voice flat and cold. You are a soldier. And I am your commanding officer. That was a direct order. Move. Now. He clicked the safety off his rifle. The standoff was a tableau of impossible choices. Izuku's conviction against Flag's duty. The squad's bloodlust against a single, desperate act of defiance. The air was thick with tension, a spark away from exploding. The spark came from an unexpected source. Dr. Thorne, seeing his one chance for survival about to be gunned down, made a last, desperate move. With a sob of terror, he slammed his hand down on a large, red button on the console beside him. If I'm going to die, he shrieked, I'm taking you all with me. Facility sterilization protocol activated. A synthesized voice filled the lab. Warning. Beta subject containment failure imminent. Automated defense turrets activated. Panels in the ceiling slid open, and heavy-caliber automated guns descended, swiveling to acquire targets. A massive, reinforced door on the far side of the lab began to shudder, a deep, inhuman roar echoing from within. The standoff was over. Hell had just begun. The turrets opened fire, spitting a deafening storm of lead into the lab. Everyone scattered. Dabi erected a wall of blue flame that melted the incoming bullets. Muscular used his own body as a shield, bullets sparking harmlessly off his augmented muscle fiber. Nagant's voice crackled over the comms. I've got line of sight on 2 of the turrets. A moment later, 2 of the guns exploded in showers of sparks as her high-caliber rounds found their mark. Izuku moved on instinct, using Black Whip to swing behind a server bank for cover. The mission was secondary now. Survival was everything. He saw Toga, caught in the open. She was dodging with uncanny agility, but a heavy piece of lab equipment, damaged by the gunfire, was tilting precariously from its ceiling mount, right above her. She was too focused on the turrets to notice. There was no thought. No calculation. Only the instinct that had been branded onto his soul at UE Save People. He launched himself from behind the server. Toga, look out! He slammed into her, tackling her and sending them both skidding across the concrete floor just as the multi-ton machine crashed down where she had been standing, shattering into a million pieces. He landed on top of her, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He quickly rolled off, his mind already calculating the next threat. Toga lay on the ground for a second, staring at him. Her wide, golden eyes were not filled with glee or bloodlust. They were filled with something he had never seen in them before, pure, unadulterated confusion. He had saved her. Him. The fallen hero. Her nemesis, her obsession. He had risked himself to save her. It was a variable her chaotic mind couldn't compute. The shuddering containment door finally gave way, ripped from its hinges. The creature that emerged was a nightmare. It was a man, or had been once. Now it was a 7-foot-tall monstrosity of twitching muscle and pulsating veins, its skin stretched taut over a frame that was unnaturally large. A crude injector was still stuck in its neck. It was a test subject for the catalyst formula. The beta subject roared, its voice a fusion of pain and rage, and charged. It ignored the turrets, which riddled its body with bullets that seemed to have no effect. It swatted Muscular aside like a fly, sending the hulking villain crashing into a wall. It saw Dr. Thorne, its creator, its torturer, and its eyes, glowing with a faint, chemical light, narrowed with singular purpose. It bounded across the room, covering the distance in a single leap. Thorne screamed, a high, thin sound that was cut short as the creature's massive hand closed around his head. There was a sickening crunch, and the scientist went limp. The creature threw his body aside like a broken doll. In the midst of the chaos, the mission objective had been completed. Dr. Thorne was eliminated, but the monster he had created was still very much alive, and it now turned its attention to the rest of them. The battle was frantic and brutal. Dalby's flames washed over the creature, which only seemed to enrage it further. Muscular got back up, roaring in fury, and engaged it in a titanic brawl that shook the entire station. Toga, having snapped out of her confusion, harried its flanks with her knives, her movements now fueled by a strange new energy. Izuku knew he had to end it. This creature was a victim, but it was too dangerous to be left alive. He looked at the vambraces on his arms. 30% wouldn't be enough. He needed more. He needed to break the rules. He funneled one for all, pushing past the 30% threshold. The vambraces immediately came to life, a high-pitched whine filling the air as they prepared to discharge. He had seconds. "I'm sorry!" he screamed, the words directed at the monster, at Thorne, at himself. He used FA gene, storing up kinetic energy with a series of quick, short steps, and then unleashed it. He shot forward like a green cannonball, shattering the floor in his wake. Detroit smash! 45%! The vambraces discharged, sending a crippling jolt of electricity through his entire body. It felt like being struck by lightning, every muscle seizing in agony. But he pushed through it. His fist, wreathed in a storm of green-black energy, connected with the beta subject's chest. The impact was like a bomb going off. The creature's roar was cut short, replaced by the sound of its reinforced ribcage cracking like porcelain. A shockwave erupted from Izuku's fist, blasting the creature backward through the far wall of the lab and into the subway tunnel beyond, where it finally collapsed, motionless. Izuku fell to one knee, his body spasming from the electrical feedback, his arms screaming in protest. The remaining turrets were silenced by Nagant. The lab fell into a sudden, ringing silence, broken only by the crackle of Dabi's flames and Izuku's own ragged breathing. Mission success. The flight back to Belle Reve was thick with a strange, new tension. No one spoke. Muscular was nursing a bruised ego. Dalby watched Izuku with a calculating, unreadable expression. Toga kept glancing at him from the corner of her eye, a thoughtful, almost predatory curiosity replacing her usual mania. Izuku sat by himself, staring at his trembling hands. He had drawn a line in the sand, and the universe had responded by washing it away with a tide of blood. He hadn't pulled the trigger, but Thorne was dead. He had tried to be a hero, and in the end, he had been forced to unleash a devastating power to put down a victim of the very man he had tried to save. There was no victory here. There were only shades of failure. Back at the facility, Flag dismissed them with a curt nod. "Debrief with Waller in the morning. Get some rest." Izuku started to walk toward his Spartan cell when Flag's voice stopped him. "Alpha," he turned. The colonel's face was grim. "What you did back there, standing up for the target, that was foolish. It was reckless. It endangered the entire squad." He paused, his gaze softening for just a fraction of a second. "It was also the right thing to do. Don't ever do it again." Before Izuku could process the contradictory statement, Flag turned and walked away. He was alone in the corridor when a voice, as cold and clear as a tombstone, echoed from a hidden speaker in the ceiling. It was Waller. "You got lucky today, Asset Alpha," she said, her voice devoid of inflection. "The objective was completed despite your insubordination. The research is secure, and a threat has been neutralized. I have my results." There was a long, chilling pause. "But do not mistake my pragmatism for forgiveness. You defied a direct order from your field commander. You placed your misplaced morality above the mission parameters. Do it again, and I will not hesitate. I don't care about your moral compass. I care about obedience. Remember your place. You are my weapon. And weapons do not get to choose their targets." The speaker clicked off, leaving him in absolute silence. He stood there for a long time, the threat hanging in the air. He had tried to hold on to a piece of the hero he once was, and it had nearly gotten everyone killed. He had saved a villain's life, and he had killed a monster that was once a man. He finally walked to his cell, the steel door sliding shut behind him. He sank onto the hard cot, the darkness of the room a welcome relief. He had drawn a line, and tonight he had learned that in the Suicide Squad, the only line that mattered was the one between life and the red mist that followed the press of a button. The debriefing was a post-mortem with the corpse still in the room. They were assembled again in the cold, blue-lit briefing room, the ghosts of the previous mission clinging to them like the damp chill of the facility. The air was thick with a new kind of tension, not the simple, simmering animosity of caged predators, but a complex web of resentment, curiosity, and contempt, all of it revolving around the boy at the end of the table. Izuku sat ramrod straight, his gaze fixed on the blank holographic display. His arm throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a phantom echo of the vambrace's punitive shock. He felt the weight of every stare. Muscular's was a hot, hateful glare, promising retribution. Dobby's was a cool, dissecting gaze full of mocking amusement. And Toga's was the most unsettling of all. She was uncharacteristically still, her usual manic energy focused into a laser-like stare of intense, unnerving curiosity. She wasn't looking at a target or a plaything. She was looking at an anomaly, a puzzle she desperately wanted to solve. Amanda Waller entered, with Colonel Flagg a half-step behind her. She didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, a shark surveying her tank. "Let's get this over with," she began, her voice clipping the silence. "The official report reads as follows. Task Force X successfully infiltrated the target facility, secured all research data and the catalyst prototype, and eliminated the primary target, Dr. Eris Thorne, along with all hostile forces. From a results-oriented perspective, the mission was a complete success." She paused, letting the word success hang in the air like a lie. "From an operational perspective," she continued, her eyes landing on Izuku, "it was a circus of insubordination and chaos." Dobby let out a low, theatrical sigh. "Oh, here we go. Don't look at us." The golden boy wanted to play hero. Threw a temper tantrum because the colonel was about to do his job. He forgot which classroom he was in. Muscular slammed a meaty fist on the table, making the metal groan in protest. His temper tantrum activated every defense system in that rat hole and unleashed that freak. "We were supposed to be in and out. I was swatting bullets because he wanted to save a sniveling piece of trash who was already dead. He was so cool though," Toga whispered, almost to herself, her eyes still locked on Izuku. "Like a knight in a really bloody, awful fairy tale." "Silence," Waller commanded, and the room obeyed instantly. Her gaze remained fixed on Izuku. "Asset Alpha. You defied a direct order from your field commander in a live combat situation. You placed the squad and the mission at risk for a man who was already marked for termination. Give me one reason why I shouldn't make an example of you right now." The threat was naked absolute. Izuku could almost feel the phantom pressure of the nanite bomb at the base of his skull. He swallowed, his throat dry. He was unarmed, ma'am. He was a non-combatant who had surrendered. The words sounded feeble even to his own ears, the last gasp of a dying code of ethics. "He was a liability," Waller corrected, her voice like ice. "And your refusal to accept that fact created a secondary threat that required the unsanctioned use of your quirk beyond mission parameters, resulting in significant damage to your assigned control equipment." She gestured to the scorched and slightly warped vambrace on his arm. Flagg cleared his throat, stepping forward slightly. "Ma'am, if I may. The situation was fluid. Asset Alpha's actions, while unorthodox, were directly responsible for neutralizing the beta subject. Without his intervention, we may have sustained casualties. It was the barest defense, delivered in a clipped, military monotone, but it was a defense nonetheless." Flagg was covering for him. Izuku didn't know why. Maybe the colonel kept a sliver of a conscience buried beneath his duty, or maybe he was simply protecting his most valuable weapon. Waller considered Flagg for a long, silent moment, then her gaze shifted back to Izuku. "You got lucky," she said, the words a final judgment. "The outcome justifies the means this time, but be very clear, Alpha. This is your one and only free pass. The next time you substitute your morality for my orders, your debriefing will be delivered to the janitorial staff with a mop and a bucket." She turned to the rest of the squad. "You have a 48-hour stand-down. Use it to remind yourselves of the rules. Dismissed. She swept out of the room, flag in her wake. The moment the door hissed shut, the fragile truce shattered. "You're a dead man, you little hero!" Muscular growled, rising from his chair and pointing a thick, muscle-bound finger at Izuku. "The second Waller's not looking. I'm going to finish what I started on that cliffside." Izuku met his glare, too exhausted and numb to feel fear. "You can try." Muscular laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, I will." He stormed out of the room, presumably heading for the weight room to punish some inanimate object. Dabi rose slowly, stretching like a cat. He gave Izuku a lazy, mocking salute. "Stellar performance, hero. Really, watching you try to reconcile your bleeding heart with the blood on your hands is the best entertainment this hellhole has to offer. Keep it up." He sauntered out, a faint trail of smoke curling from his fingertips. Toga was the last to leave. She practically skipped over to Izuku, stopping right in front of him. She leaned in close, her golden eyes wide and searching. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice a genuine, curious whisper. "Why did you save me? I would have cut you. I wanted to. But you still pushed me away from the big scary machine." Izuku had no answer for her. It was instinct. It was what he was. Or what he used to be. "I don't know," he said honestly. Her face fell, a brief flicker of disappointment. "Oh." She tilted her head. "Well, whatever. It was very nice. Nicely confusing." She smiled, a flash of her canines. "It makes me want to know what you're made of even more." And with that cryptic statement, she twirled and skipped out of the room, leaving Izuku alone in the suffocating silence. He couldn't stand the common room. The weight of the other villain's presence was a physical thing, a miasma of hate and madness that choked him. He needed space. He needed to hit something. He found his way to the training room. It was a vast, cavernous space, larger than any of UA's gyms. The walls were scarred and pitted from years of abuse by inmates with destructive quirks. It was a cathedral of violence. A single, heavily reinforced punching bag hung in the center of the room, a lone sentinel in the gloom. Izuku started to work. He didn't focus on his form, didn't try to channel one for all. He just hit the bag, channeling all his frustration, guilt, and despair into his fists. Thorn's terrified face. Thwack. The beta subject's roar of agony. Thwack. Dabi's mocking words. Hypocrite in a cage. Thwack. Waller's cold threat. Thwack. He was a machine, his knuckles quickly splitting, the sting of the pain a welcome distraction from the storm in his soul. He wasn't training. He was performing a ritual of self-flagellation. He was trying to beat the hero out of himself, to pummel his own conscience into a bloody, unrecognizable pulp, because it was the only thing that could get him killed in this place. "You fight like a man trying to outrun his own shadow." The voice was low, calm, and came from the darkness behind him. Izuku spun around, his fists raised, green lightning crackling instinctively around them before he suppressed it. Lady Nagant was perched on a high platform, her legs crossed, her biomechanical rifle laid across her lap. She was polishing a component with a small cloth, her movements precise and unhurried. He hadn't even heard her come in. She must have been there the whole time, watching. "You pour all your power into your fists, but your foundation is weak," she continued, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "Your heart and your head are at war. A fighter like that is already defeated. What do you want?" Izuku asked, his voice raw. She didn't answer immediately. She finished her task, the component clicking back into place with a satisfying snick. She looked down at him, her single visible eye holding a weary, ancient wisdom. "I've seen boys like you before. Full of fire and conviction. The HPSC loves boys like you. You're easy to mold. And easier to break." She gracefully hopped down from the platform, landing with a soundless grace that belied her height. She walked toward him, her pace measured. She wasn't threatening, but her presence commanded attention. "You still think you're in the hero world, don't you?" she said, stopping a few feet away. "You think there are lines? Good guys and bad guys. Rules of engagement." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "I used to believe that too. I was their poster girl. The smiling sniper who always got her man. I believed in the symbol on the badge, in the mission. Her expression darkened, her gaze turning inward, to a memory he couldn't see. Then they gave me an order. A housekeeping mission. A fellow pro-hero had started asking questions, getting too close to some unsavory alliances the Commission had made. He was a good man. A true hero. And they classified him as a liability. She looked at Izuku, her eye boring into him. They ordered me to eliminate him. Quietly. To make it look like a villain attack. I was supposed to be the weapon that kept the pristine image of Hero Society clean. I was their dirty little secret. Izuku stared, speechless. He had read the official report. Lady Nagant had snapped, killing a colleague in a fit of jealous rage. It was all a lie. A cover story. I refuse, Nagant said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I told them I wouldn't murder a good man for their political games. So they sent someone else. And then they framed me for it. They buried me in Tartarus and turned my name into a cautionary tale to keep any other heroes from getting ideas above their station. That's what the HPSC does, kid. They don't deal in good and evil. They deal in assets and liabilities. And the moment an asset becomes a liability, it gets liquidated. The pieces clicked into place in Izuku's mind. His own situation. He wasn't just a scapegoat for a tragic accident. He was a power too big to be controlled. An asset that had become a liability. They hadn't imprisoned him for public safety. They had caged him because they were afraid of him. Waller! He breathed. Waller is the Commission's true face, stripped of all the smiles and pageantry. Nagant confirmed with a grim nod. She is the logical conclusion of their entire philosophy. She's the scalpel they use in the dark so the heroes you admire can stand in the light and keep their hands clean. She points us at the problems they create or can't solve. And if we die, it doesn't matter. Our names are already erased. She turned to leave, her point made. You tried to save that scientist because you still believe in the rules. You need to understand something, kid. Waller doesn't just break the rules. She builds the board. She owns all the pieces. And we're not even pawns. We're the dice she rolls, and she doesn't care how we land. She paused at the doorway. Just remember. In this place, the only person you can trust is the one holding the detonator. And you can't even trust her. Lady Nagant disappeared into the corridor, leaving Izuku alone with the punching bag and the poisonous seeds of her truth. His world, already shattered, was now being ground into dust. He wasn't a fallen hero being rehabilitated. He wasn't serving a harsh but necessary justice. He was a slave. A tool for a corrupt system, wielded by the most ruthless woman he had ever met. The thought didn't bring anger. It brought a terrifying, hollow clarity. A tinny voice echoed from an intercom above. Asset Alpha, report to the director's office. Immediately, the walk to Waller's office was the longest of his life. Every step was heavy with dread. Nagant's words echoed in his mind. He was expecting punishment. An execution. A final lesson in obedience. Her office was exactly as he'd imagined it, immaculate, orderly, and cold. It was perched high in the facility's central spire, a glass-walled cage that overlooked the entire panopticon of Belle Reve. From her desk, she could see everything, the common room, the training areas, the cell blocks. She was a goddess on a steel and concrete Olympus. She was sitting behind a large, obsidian-black desk, her fingers steepled. She didn't look angry. She looked placid. It was infinitely more terrifying. Sit, she said, gesturing to the single chair opposite her. It felt like an electric chair. He sat down stiffly. I reviewed Colonel Flagg's full after-action report. She began, her voice calm and even. As well as the sensor readings from your suit and vambraces. Your combat effectiveness during the breach and against the beta subject was impressive. Exceeding the 30% power limit was a direct violation of protocol, but it was also a calculated risk that paid off. It shows a certain adaptability. This was not what he was expecting. Praise? His mind reeled. This was a test. It had to be. I am not going to punish you for your insubordination, Midoriya, she said, using his name for the first time since Tartarus. It felt strange, intimate, and profoundly wrong. Punishment is a tool for correcting behavior. But I'm beginning to think your behavior isn't something that needs correction. It just needs to be properly incentivized. She swiveled in her chair and tapped a key on her terminal. A massive screen on the wall behind her, previously displaying security feeds, flickered to life. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. It was a live feed. A bright, sunlit apartment. It was clean, cozy, with pots of vibrant flowers on the windowsill. And in the middle of it was his mother, Inko Midoriya. She was humming to herself, tending to a small geranium, a gentle, peaceful smile on her face. She looked happy. Healthier and more relaxed than he had seen her in years. After your incident, Waller explained, her voice a low purr, your mother was placed under a great deal of stress. Harassment from the media, vandals, threats from anti-hero extremists. It was taking a toll. Izuku felt a hot spike of shame and anger. He knew this. He had seen the footage in Tartarus, so I had her moved, Waller continued. That is a secure, high-end apartment in a private, gated community on the coast. The official story, manufactured by my public relations team and leaked to the press, is that the Deku catastrophe was a deep cover operation. That you, a promising young hero, were instrumental in exposing a villain who could manipulate tectonic plates, and that you were tragically injured in the process. You are currently in a specialized HPSC recovery facility, undergoing treatment. You are, in the eyes of the world, a hero again. A wounded one, but a hero nonetheless. She let him absorb that. The lie was so complete, so insidious. She hadn't just cleared his name, she had rewritten his failure into a triumph. She gets a generous stipend from an anonymous HPSC benefactor. Waller went on, her eyes fixed on his reaction. She has private security. She is safe. She is proud of her son, the hero. Waller swiveled back to face him, her expression a mask of cold empathy. She's smiling, Izuku. For the first time in months. She thinks you're safe. She thinks you're recovering, and that peace, that smile, is bought and paid for by your service. By your obedience to me. The trap snapped shut. It was brilliant. It was monstrous. It was unbreakable. Nagant was wrong. Waller didn't just hold the detonator to his life. She held the detonator to his mother's happiness. A threat to hurt Inko would have filled him with rage, with defiance. But a threat to take away her peace? To shatter her heart by revealing the truth of what her son had become, a killer, a monster, a slave in a black site prison? That was a leash he could never break. He would endure any hell for himself, but he would not, could not, be the cause of his mother's suffering. He felt the fight drain out of him, replaced by a cold, hollow resignation. He finally understood his cage. It wasn't Belle Reve. It wasn't the nanite bomb. It was his own heart. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice a dead, empty whisper. Waller leaned forward, a predator that knew it had its prey cornered. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, and it was the cruelest sound he had ever heard. I want what I've always wanted. I want you to be the weapon I know you can be. I want you to point that world-breaking power at my enemies and pull the trigger. No hesitation. No morality plays, no lines in the sand. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over her kingdom of concrete and despair. You have a choice, Izuku. You can continue to fight me, to cling to the tattered remnants of a heroic code that no longer applies to you. And every time you do, I will let a little bit of the truth leak out. A reporter gets an anonymous tip. Your mother's security detail gets accidentally reassigned. Her peace will crumble, bit by bit. Or, she turned back to him, her face set like stone. You can do your job. You can be my monster. You can eliminate my problems. And your mother will never have to cry for her son again. She will live out her days believing you died a hero. The choice was no choice at all. He was checkmated. He looked from the serene image of his smiling mother on the screen to the cold, hard face of the woman who owned his soul. The hero Deku was a lie she had created to manipulate the world. Asset Alpha was the truth. It was time he started acting like it. I understand, he said, the words tasting like ash. I know you do, Waller replied, a faint, triumphant smile touching her lips. Now get out of my office. You have a 47-hour stand-down. I suggest you use it to mourn the boy you used to be. He's not coming back. He stood up on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else and walked out of the office. As the door hissed shut behind him, he didn't go to the training room or the common area. He walked straight to his cell, the small, dark room that was his only sanctuary. He sat on the edge of his cot in the darkness, the live feed of his smiling mother seared into his memory. He finally understood the true nature of his prison. It wasn't built of walls or bombs. It was built of love. And it was inescapable. The 47 hours of stand-down passed in a suffocating, silent crawl. For Izuku, it was a period of grim metamorphosis, a forced shedding of a skin he had worn his entire life. The boy who dreamed of being the next symbol of peace, who filled notebooks with hero analysis and smiled to put others at ease, was a ghost. In his place, a new consciousness was taking root, one forged in the cold calculus of Amanda Waller's ultimatum. It was pragmatic, analytical, and hollowed out by a profound, soul-deep grief. He spent the time in a self-imposed isolation, avoiding the other members of the squad. He ran tactical simulations in his mind, breaking down their last mission, identifying inefficiencies, and replaying his own fatal hesitation with a cold, critical eye. He was no longer analyzing how a hero would act. He was analyzing how a weapon should be deployed. He ate the tasteless nutrient paste delivered to his cell, he slept in short, dreamless bursts, and he trained. He didn't pummel the heavy bag with rage anymore. His movements were precise, controlled, an exercise in maximizing efficiency. He was honing the tool. He was sharpening the blade. The rest of the squad seemed to sense the change. Muscular still glared at him with undisguised hatred, but the promise of a future beatdown was now tinged with a sliver of wary respect for the power he'd witnessed. Toga watched him from a distance, her usual manic energy replaced by a quiet, contemplative curiosity. She seemed to be studying a new and fascinating species of animal. Dalby, ever the cynic, simply observed him with a detached, almost academic interest, as if watching a predictable chemical reaction unfold. Only Lady Negant offered a brief, almost imperceptible nod of understanding when their paths crossed, a shared acknowledgement of the damnation they both inhabited. When the summons came for the next briefing, Izuku was the first to arrive. He took a seat at the table, his back straight, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He was a statue of grim resolve. When Waller entered, she gave him a brief, approving glance. Her conditioning was taking hold. The holographic display flickered to life, showing not a person, but a symbol, the stylized, book-like logo of the Meta Liberation Army. A low murmur went through the room. The MLA had been a ghost story since their defeat at Daika City, a shattered ideology. As some of you may recall, Waller began, her voice a low, commanding tone that sliced through the quiet. The original Meta Liberation Army, under the command of Rikiya Yatsubashi, was absorbed into the Paranormal Liberation Front. A messy, inconvenient alliance that ended in a costly war for Heroes Society. The display shifted, showing satellite images of urban decay, abandoned city blocks, and makeshift refugee camps. In the wake of that war, with the HPSC's resources stretched thin and public faith in heroes at an all-time low, a power vacuum has formed. And nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. A new face appeared on the screen. It was a man in his late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, a charismatic smile, and perfectly coiffed silver hair. He was dressed not in a villain costume, but in a tailored, expensive suit, addressing a massive, cheering crowd in what looked like an underground rally. "This is Kenshin aka the Orator," Waller said. "He's a former political strategist and a powerful telepath. He's been quietly uniting the scattered remnants of the MLA, not with promises of destruction, but with a new, more insidious message, quirk freedom as a civil right. He's recasting Destro not as a villain, but as a revolutionary martyr. He's smarter, more charismatic, and more dangerous than Yatsubashi ever was." "Politics is boring," Muscular grumbled. "When do we get to smash something?" "You'll get your chance," Waller replied without looking at him. "Because Kenshin isn't just giving speeches. He's acquired a weapon." The display changed again, showing a complex schematic of a device that looked like a satellite dish fused with a bomb. It was a nightmarish fusion of technology and what looked like bioorganic components. This is the Liberator, Waller stated, the name dripping with derision. It's a resonance bomb. It doesn't detonate with explosive force. Instead, it emits a massive, omnidirectional wave of concentrated quark energy. Our analysts believe it functions by hijacking the body's own bioenergy, forcibly hyperactivating the quark singularity factor in every living person within its blast radius. A simulation played on the screen. A map of a densely populated city district. A red circle expanded from the center, covering a 10-mile radius. In its wake, every building, every person, pulsed with a chaotic energy. The effect is apocalyptic, Waller said, her voice grim. It wouldn't just awaken latent quarks in the quarkless. It would amplify existing quarks to uncontrollable, catastrophic levels. A child with a minor hydrokinesis quirk could inadvertently trigger a flash flood. A man who can generate a small flame could become a walking inferno. It would cause a citywide cascade of death and destruction, all triggered by the victims themselves. It's not just a weapon of mass destruction, it's a weapon of mass self-destruction. A perfect, horrific demonstration of the MLA's philosophy, that true freedom, true power, is inherently chaotic. Izuku stared at the simulation, his new, cold analytical mind kicking into overdrive. It was a work of twisted genius, an attack that couldn't be blamed on the villains, but on the very nature of quarks themselves. It would shatter society's already fragile trust in quarks forever. Kenshin plans to detonate the Liberator and the Shinjuku Gilded District in 3 days, during the annual Lumina Festival, Waller concluded. A high-density commercial and residential zone, packed with festival-goers. The projected casualties are in the hundreds of thousands. Our mission is to infiltrate Kenshin's headquarters, a fortified skyscraper in the old financial district, disable the device, and capture Kenshin. He is to be taken alive. His mind is a treasure trove of intel we need. What's the catch? Dobby drawled, speaking for the first time. There's always a catch. The catch, Waller said, meeting his gaze, is that Kenshin's headquarters, the Zenith Tower, is a fortress. He has hundreds of true believers, all with powerful quirks, acting as his private army. Their loyalty is absolute, thanks to his telepathic influence. Furthermore, the building's security is run by a technopath who has turned the entire skyscraper into a death trap. A frontal assault is suicide. Standard hero teams would be bogged down in a war of attrition, and Kenshin would have all the time in the world to detonate the bomb remotely. We, however, are not a standard hero team. She looked around the table, her gaze pausing on each of them. This mission requires a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. It requires a plan. Colonel Flagg stepped forward, tapping the holographic display. A tactical layout of the Zenith Tower appeared. The tower has 3 primary security choke points, the ground floor lobby, which will be heavily fortified, the 50th floor server farm, which controls the building's internal systems and is guarded by the technopath, and the penthouse, where Kenshin and the Liberator are located. Waller's plan is a 3-pronged infiltration. The plan is flawed. The voice was quiet, steady, and came from the end of the table. Every head in the room turned. Izuku had spoken. Flagg stopped, his expression a mixture of surprise and irritation. Dalby raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his stapled lips. Waller's expression was unreadable, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Excuse me, Asset Alpha?" she said, her voice dangerously soft. Izuku stood up. He walked to the holographic display, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't look afraid. He looked focused. He gestured to the schematic. A 3-pronged attack divides our forces and assumes we can overcome each choke point independently. He began, his voice clear and analytical. It was the voice of the boy who had mumbled strategies in Class 1A, but stripped of all its nervous energy, honed to a razor's edge. Kenshin is a telepath. He'll sense a scattered assault. The technopath will isolate and eliminate each team one by one. It's inefficient and carries a high probability of failure. He tapped the display, bringing up the tower's power grid schematics. The tower's primary power conduit runs through a subterranean maintenance tunnel connected to the city's old geothermal plant. It's a blind spot. Redundant systems won't cover a direct surge from the source. He then pointed to the server farm. The technopath is the linchpin. Neutralizing him is the primary objective, not a secondary one. If we cut the head off the snake, the body will thrash, but it won't be able to think. His eyes moved over each member of the squad, not as a teammate, but as a chess master assessing his pieces. The mission shouldn't be a three-pronged assault. It should be a single, surgical strike, executed in 2 phases. He looked directly at Waller, his green eyes holding her cold gaze without flinching. Phase 1, subterfuge and disruption. Phase 2, decapitation strike. The room was silent. The sheer audacity of the disgraced student dissecting and dismissing the plan of the ruthless director of Task Force X was breathtaking. Muscular looked confused. Toga was watching with rapt attention, as if seeing him for the first time. Waller didn't look angry. A slow, cold smile spread across her face. This was the weapon she wanted. Not a broken boy, but a cold, calculating strategist with a monster coiled inside him. Elaborate, Alpha, she said, and so he did. For the next 10 minutes, Izuku laid out his plan with a chilling precision. Phase 1. He began, manipulating the holographic display with a newfound confidence. Nagant provides overwatch and communications jamming from an adjacent rooftop. She is our eye in the sky and our guarantee that Kenshin can't call for outside help. He turned his attention to Toga. Toga, you are our infiltration specialist. We need a high-ranking MLA officer. Your objective is to acquire their blood and their biometrics. There is a commander who leaves the tower every night at 2200 to visit a nearby bar. You will intercept him, create a perfect copy, and use his credentials to get the rest of us into the subterranean access tunnel. He looked at Dabi. Dabi and Muscular, you two are the disruption team. Once we are inside, you will proceed to the geothermal plant. On my signal, you will overload the primary power conduit. Dabi, your flames can superheat the regulators. Muscular, your strength can shatter the coolant pipes. The resulting power surge won't just knock out the lights. It will fry every unsecured electronic system in the lower half of the tower, and, most importantly, create a massive diversion. Finally, he looked at Flag and himself. Colonel Flag and I are the strike team. While the disruption team draws the attention of the MLA forces to the lower levels, we will use the chaos to ascend. The emergency systems will be haywire. The technopath will be blind. We move fast, we move quiet. We go straight for the 50th floor. We neutralize the technopath, which gives us control of the tower's internal systems. From there, it's a straight shot to the penthouse. He finished, the silence in the room now one of stunned consideration. His plan was audacious, complex, and relied on every member of the squad performing their specific role with perfect timing. It was also tactically brilliant. It turned their greatest weaknesses, their lack of cohesion, and their chaotic natures, into strengths. It used Dabi and Muscular as a blunt instrument of chaos, Toga as a phantom, Nagant as a silent guardian, and himself as the scalpel. Flag was the first to speak, looking over the plan on the display. The risk of cascading failure is high, he said, though his tone was analytical, not dismissive. If any one part of the plan fails, the entire team is compromised. High risk, high reward, Izuku countered calmly. Your plan sends us into a meat grinder. My plan bypasses it. It's a gamble, but it's a calculated one. Dabi actually laughed, a dry, rasping sound. I'll say this for the kid, he's got balls. Using me and the musclehead as a glorified distraction? It's insulting, but it's not stupid. I'm in. I get to smash a power plant? Muscular grinned, cracking his knuckles. Fine by me. Toga clapped her hands together. Ooh. A dress-up party. I love it. I'll get to be someone else for a little while. So exciting. Waller stared at Izuku, her expression unreadable. She saw the change in him. The hollowed-out eyes, the clinical precision, the complete absence of the heroic pleading from the last mission. She had wanted a weapon, and in her efforts to break the boy, she had inadvertently forged a general. Very well, Alpha, she said, a note of genuine approval in her voice. We will proceed with your plan. Colonel Flag, you will provide tactical support, but Asset Alpha will have operational command on this mission. A shockwave went through the room. She was putting him in charge. The fallen hero, the new meat, was now leading a squad of killers and monsters. His strategy is sound, Waller continued, cutting off any potential protest. From this moment on, you will follow his orders as you would my own. Do I make myself clear? A chorus of grudging assents answered her. Izuku felt nothing. No pride. No satisfaction. He had simply identified a problem and formulated the most efficient solution. It was a cold, logical process. He looked at the faces of his squad, the pyromaniac, the brute, the shapeshifter, the assassin, and he didn't see villains. He saw assets. Tools to be utilized for the successful completion of an objective. As they filed out of the room to prepare, Dalby fell into step beside him. You know, the villain said, his voice a low drawl. For a boy who whined about not killing people, you just planned a mission that will almost certainly get dozens of those MLA fanatics killed in the diversion. Izuku didn't look at him. He just kept walking. They're acceptable casualties, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Dalby's smirk widened. There it is, he whispered, more to himself than to Izuku. The other side. Welcome to the club, hero.